There are moments in life that seem small at first, almost insignificant, but later become impossible to forget. Not because of what they felt like in the moment, but because of what they meant after everything was revealed. Many people have experienced something like this without realizing it. A sudden feeling that appears without warning, interrupting an ordinary day. It doesn't come with a clear reason. There is no visible cause, no event happening in front of them that could explain it. And yet, the sensation is real enough to be noticed. It might feel like a quiet heaviness, a subtle anxiety, or even a strange sense of silence that doesn't belong to the environment they are in. At the time, most people ignore it. Life continues, and the moment fades into the background like any other passing emotion. But then something happens that changes everything. A message arrives, a phone rings, news comes in, often unexpectedly. Someone has died, and when the details become clear, something unsettling emerges. The time of that feeling, the moment when something felt off without explanation, aligns almost perfectly with the moment that life ended somewhere else. It is this detail that makes the experience difficult to dismiss. If it had happened before or after, it could be explained as anticipation or reaction. But when it happens at the exact same time without any prior knowledge, it creates a question that lingers. How can someone feel something happening at a distance without any physical connection, without any information, and without any reason to expect it? For some, the answer is simple. It is coincidence. The mind creating meaning after the fact, a natural tendency to connect events that were never truly connected. But for others, especially those who have experienced it more than once, that explanation begins to feel incomplete. Because what they felt was not vague. It was not imagined after the news. It was something real in the moment it happened, something that stood out from everything else, even if they didn't understand it at the time. And this is where the question begins to deepen. Not just whether these moments are real, but what they might reveal if they are. What if, in the exact moment one life ends, something is not simply lost, but transmitted in a way we do not yet understand? What makes these experiences so difficult to ignore is not just the feeling itself, but its timing. Emotions are part of everyday life. People feel anxious, sad, or unsettled for countless reasons, many of which they never fully understand. A sudden discomfort by itself is not unusual. What makes this different is that, in these cases, the feeling does not behave like a normal emotion. It appears abruptly, without context. There is no thought that leads to it, no memory that triggers it, no external event that explains it. It simply arrives, fully formed, as if it did not originate from the usual flow of the mind, and often it carries a weight that feels out of proportion to the moment. Some describe it as a quiet but undeniable certainty that something is wrong. Others experience a deep emotional shift, as if their internal state has been altered in an instant. There are even cases where the feeling is not negative, but instead strangely calm, as if something significant has just occurred, even though nothing visible has changed. At the time, most people do what they always do with unexplained feelings. They rationalize. They assume it is stress, fatigue, or simply the mind reacting to something unnoticed. And because there is no immediate confirmation, the moment is often dismissed. But what happens next is what gives that feeling a different meaning. When the news arrives, the memory of that exact moment returns with clarity. The time, the sensation, the atmosphere, all of it aligns with something that, until then, was completely unknown to the person who felt it. This is what separates these experiences from ordinary emotional fluctuations. It is not just that something was felt, it is that it was felt at the exact moment something irreversible was happening elsewhere. And this raises a deeper question about the nature of that feeling. If it was not triggered by thought, memory, or environment, then where did it come from? Because whatever its origin may be, it seems to follow a pattern that is too precise to ignore and too consistent to be easily dismissed. If this kind of experience happened only once, it would be easy to dismiss. A single moment, a single coincidence could always be explained as chance. The human mind is naturally inclined to find meaning even where none exists. It connects events, fills gaps, and creates narratives that make the world feel more coherent than it actually is. But the difficulty begins when these moments are not isolated across different people in different places and in completely unrelated situations. The same pattern appears. Someone feels something unusual without any apparent reason. Hours later, or sometimes within minutes, they discover that someone close to them has died. And again, the timing aligns. These accounts do not come from one specific group. They are not limited to a particular belief system, culture, or way of thinking. They appear in people who are skeptical, in people who are highly analytical, and even in those who had never considered the possibility of anything beyond what can be explained. What makes this more complex is not just the number of reports, but their similarity. The descriptions often follow the same structure: a sudden shift, a feeling that stands out, a moment that feels different from everything else. And later, a confirmation that connects the experience to a real event. At this point, the explanation of coincidence begins to feel less convincing. Not because coincidence is impossible, but because repetition changes how we interpret probability. When something happens over and over again in a consistent way, it invites a different kind of question. Not that this happened by chance, but what kind of mechanism could produce the same result across so many independent experiences? Science often relies on patterns to identify underlying processes. When a pattern is observed consistently, it becomes the starting point for deeper investigation. But in this case, the pattern exists without a clear mechanism that can be easily measured or observed. And that is where the discomfort begins. Because now the question is no longer about whether these experiences are real. It becomes a question about whether our current understanding of connection, awareness, and distance is complete. If these experiences are not random, then something must connect them. Not in a physical sense, not through anything that can be seen or measured directly, but in a way that operates beneath the surface of what we usually consider reality. Because what makes these moments so difficult to explain is not just their timing, but the apparent distance involved. In many of these cases, the people involved are far apart, different cities, sometimes different countries. There is no communication happening, no signal being sent in any conventional way, and yet something is felt, as if distance itself had become irrelevant for a brief moment. This challenges one of the most basic assumptions we rely on, that connection requires proximity, that for something to affect us, it must happen near us, or at least be transmitted through a system we can identify. But these experiences suggest something different. They suggest that certain forms of connection may not depend on physical distance at all. Human relationships are not built only on presence. They are built on memory, emotion, shared experience, and something more subtle that is difficult to define. Over time, these elements create bonds that are not visible, but are undeniably real. We feel them in absence, we carry them across years, and they continue to influence us even when nothing physical remains. What if, at the moment of death, something within that bond is activated? Not as a deliberate signal, not as a message sent with intention, but as a natural consequence of a connection that already exists, a kind of resonance where one side of the connection responds instantly to a change on the other, regardless of distance. This does not require the idea that thoughts are traveling through space in a measurable way. It suggests something more subtle, that awareness itself may not be entirely confined to the boundaries of the individual mind. Because if consciousness were completely isolated, these experiences would have no pathway to occur. There would be no way for one person's transition to be reflected in the experience of another. And yet, the pattern suggests that something is shared even if we cannot fully describe what that is. So the question becomes more precise, not whether people can feel something at a distance, but whether the distance was ever as real or as limiting as we assumed it to be. When people try to explain these experiences, they often focus on the event itself, the moment of death, the feeling that appeared, the coincidence that seems too precise to ignore. But perhaps the most important part is not the event and not even the timing. It is what these moments quietly suggest about us. Because if someone can feel the exact moment another life ends, without being there, without knowing, without any physical signal connecting them, then something about the way we understand separation may be incomplete. We tend to believe that each person exists within clear boundaries. A body defines where we begin and where we end. Distance separates one life from another. And when someone is gone, that separation becomes absolute. But these experiences seem to challenge that idea. They suggest that the connections we form are not entirely dependent on physical presence, that something of what we share with others remains active, even when there is no visible interaction taking place. Not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in something subtle, quiet, almost imperceptible, and yet strong enough to be felt in the exact moment something changes. This does not necessarily mean that every connection produces such an experience. Many moments of loss pass without any sensation at all. But the existence of even a few cases is enough to raise a question that cannot be easily dismissed. What kind of connection continues to exist beyond distance and perhaps even beyond the limits of the body? Because if that connection remains even briefly at the moment one life ends, then maybe what we call separation is not as complete as it seems. Maybe what we experience as distance is only part of the story. And maybe in ways we do not fully understand, the lives we touch continue to be linked to us not just in memory, but in something deeper, something that does not depend on being seen, something that does not depend on being measured, something that for a brief moment can still be felt, even from far away.